Hey guys, my name is Jimmy. Today we're going to be doing a build guide for a white-themed gaming/content creation PC. Thanks to GIGABYTE and CORSAIR for sponsoring all the parts for today's video. And with that, let's get started. So before we begin, we do need to make sure we have a couple tools before we start, just to make sure everything goes smoothly. A Phillips screwdriver, a pair of zip tie cutters, optional, as well as some zip ties. These are not required, but they do make it easier to cable manage at the end, so you don't have cables all over the place. So we're going to start off with the GIGABYTE B650 AERO G. The reason we chose this board is because it is a white-themed board, and it supports our chip, which is an AMD chip. So to go with this motherboard, we have the AMD Ryzen 9 7900X 3D. We chose this chip because it's one of the best gaming chips out there. So to install the CPU, we're just gonna lift this little cover here. Be careful, there are a lot of pins on this motherboard. So this motherboard is an LGA style, which has the pins on the motherboard and not the chip, like the older Ryzens do. So you do wanna be careful that you don't bend any of the pins or to put your finger in there. As you see, there are no pins on the chip. The older Ryzens do have those pins there, so this is a different style. And to install it, you're gonna notice a little gold triangle on the top of the chip here. There's a little triangle that you wanna match up with the chip. There's also these notches here as well to help you line it up. So you just wanna gently place the chip inside, slowly put the cover back on, and it'll pop off. There you go, CPU is installed. So next, we're going to install the RAM. We have a CORSAIR Vengeance RGB DDR5 running at 6,000 megatransfers per second. It's a 32 gig kit, as you can see here. So there's gonna be 2 sticks of 16. So it's labeled here. It tells you which slots to use. So it's saying 2 and 4, use first. So I wanna open up those tabs there. And then to install the RAM, you want to line up so that that notch, see that there's a space without the pins here. You can see on the motherboard as well that there's a space there without the pins. You just wanna line it up and then click down. Once you hear a click, that side's good, the other side's good. Just wanna do the same thing with the other one as well. There you go, RAM's installed. So next, we're going to install the SSD. Here we have the Corsair MP600 Pro low profile. This is a 1 terabyte SSD, PCIe Gen 4, so you're gonna get really fast speeds. To install that, we're just gonna put on the top slot here. Generally, the top slot is the one running off the CPU, so you get your best speeds and the best latency that way. We're gonna not use this cover because the SSD already has a heatsink, so we don't need to reuse this. So as you can see, this SSD has a very nice metal heatsink, so it's gonna do a lot better job than the one that comes with the motherboard. So with this motherboard, generally they use screws to screw down the M.2 SSD, but this one's using a little plastic clip, so you don't actually need to have a screwdriver for that. You also want to peel off any sort of plastic. So once you feel it go all the way in, you can drop it down and clip it in place. There we go, it's installed. No, it's not. Okay, so since this SSD already has a full heatsink on it, we don't actually need this backplate here. So we're just gonna remove that real quick. So to install the SSD, you want to line up the little tooth here with the slot as well. And you want to put it in at a kind of like a 45-degree angle. If you don't, you might damage the pins on the motherboard. So once it goes in all the way, you can just drop it down and clip it in. There you go, the SSD is installed. So you do always want to make sure you want to peel off any plastic you see on the motherboard, just because you don't want the plastic getting hot and peeling off in the case while it's on, because it might fly into a fan and cause some damage, right? So after you peel all the plastic off the motherboard, you are ready to install it into your case. So with every case, you get one of these like accessory boxes that has all your screws and extra stuff like zip ties, like this. So these off to the side. Make sure that you read the instructions in the case box, so which screws do what. They'll be labeled on the instructions. So we're going to install the motherboard now. So to make our lives a little easier, while I'm peeling off this plastic here, we already did prep the case, remove all the panels to make it easier to install all the components. As you can see, everything's been taken off. So for this case, there's actually a little metal, on the standoff, there's a little metal peg that's used to line up the motherboard with that little hole there. So to install the motherboard, just gotta line up the back there and make sure the pegs line up. So that middle peg is holding the motherboard up and keeping it, making sure that it's in the right place. So now you wanna go ahead and start screwing in the motherboard. So there's no particular pattern you need to screw in for the motherboard. Just make sure everything is relatively tight, but not too tight where you're causing any damage. Just when the screw stops by itself. And you wanna make sure you use, you wanna put screws in every single hole in the motherboard. You don't wanna do a shortcut and only use the top, the four corners or something. That can cause issues with the motherboard flexing and possibly damaging parts. Really helps to have a magnet on your screwdriver so the screws don't fall off. So once you have the motherboard installed, you can go ahead and start plugging in things like the front I/O, the fans, all that stuff, just to make it easier for you later. So you notice this motherboard, or this case, has 4 USB-A ports on the top. Unfortunately, this motherboard does not have 2 USB 3.0 headers, so we can only use 2 of the ports. You can buy an adapter to convert it to USB 2.0, but for the sake of this video, we don't have it right now, so we're just not gonna use 2 of the ports. Since we only have 1, we're only gonna use the 1. So at this point, we're gonna start plugging in cables, just to make it a little easier for organization. So what I'm doing now is the audio, the front panel audio, so the headphone microphone jack up here. This case is a microphone and headphone combo jack, similar to how you see on your old cell phones or on your laptop. And that goes usually into the bottom left corner of the case. Always check your motherboard manual to know exactly where things need to be plugged in. Next, I'm going to be doing the USB-C front header, which is this cable right here. That plugs into. So once it plugs in, you're gonna hear a little click. Once it clicks in, you know it's in. So you can't really pull it out. Next, we're gonna plug in the front I/O. So this is the power button, the LED for the power button, as well as the hard drive and reset button. So all these are labeled. Once again, check your motherboard manual to know where to plug it into your motherboard. Once you plug everything in from your case, it should look something like this. We try to keep it as organized as possible, making shorter cable runs, just to make it look a lot neater. And so just to recap, we plugged in the front panel USB-C, so the USB-C port on the top of the computer case up here. We plugged in the USB 3.0 header here. We plugged in the power button, the reset button, as well as the power LEDs. And we plugged in the front panel audio. So before we install the fans, I'm just gonna plug in the fan and RGB controller from the case using the USB cable here. And then we have these CORSAIR LL120s, sponsored by CORSAIR. And we're gonna use them to fill out the case with all the fans. So we finished installing all the fans on this side as well as the back here. So next we're going to be installing the CPU cooler. So here we have the CORSAIR iCUE H150i Elite LCD. So we're going to replace the fans that come with it with the LL120s just to have everything the same in the case so it looks consistent. So when you're installing a water cooler, you want to kind of like mock fit everything like that first and just kind of visualize where you want everything to be. So like, I could have it like this. Actually, this might be nicer. No, I'll do it like this. So we put the fans on the radiator here. So now we're gonna mount the radiator up to the top of the case here. We have it set so that the fans are gonna be pulling air up from the case outside. Generally, you do want some sort of like in the front, out the top, or out the back. For these fans here, we want them blowing out just because any hot air that gets pulled out of the GPU will go straight out the case instead of up into the CPU cooler. So we don't get that hot air for the CPU. These are just the brackets for the AM4, AM5, just because the ones that come with it are Intel. So since we're installing on a AMD based system, we need to install these AM4, AM5 brackets. And also, this cooler comes with the thermal paste already pre-applied, so you don't need to put your own thermal paste. If you see it already on there, don't add more. There's no real reason to. So we finished with the cable management for the most part. We still have to do a little more once we install the power supply and install the graphics card. But this is just a general, like, it's good to do it now instead of doing it later when you have every cable in the case. So next we're gonna get the power supply and install it. So for the power supply, we have the CORSAIR RM1000X shift power supply. So as you can see on the side here, the cables are all on the side. Normally, when you have a modular power supply, you have the cables on this side, opposite of where you have it plugged into the wall. So what makes this very cool is that you can plug all your cables to the side, so you don't have to worry about, let's say I want to add another graphics card, I don't have to pull the whole thing out to plug more cables into it. With this, when you have it in there, everything is accessible from the front. So normally I wouldn't do this, but since it's this power supply, I can install it right now and not worry about it until later. So as you can see, all the cables are on this side of the power supply. Normally they'd be in here and you'd have to like stick your hand in to try and get stuff plugged in or, you know, replace cables. But with this power supply, everything's right here, so it's easier just to get to everything. So as far as I'm aware, this is the only power supply that has this sort of system. Not every case can use it because not every case has a standard layout where you have the fan on the bottom, right? If you have, let's say, the fan on the top, right, then these will be on the wrong side and you can't plug anything in. So you only want to buy this with your case in mind. You don't want to just buy this for every single build. Yeah, so now that we have the power supply installed, we're just going to plug in all the cables that we want to. Actually, should I do the graphics card first? No, it's more annoying. Do after. So we finished installing and managing the CPU power, as well as the 24-pin motherboard power. So as you can see, it's really clean with this new power supply style on the side. So next we're gonna do the graphics card. So here we have the GIGABYTE AERO GeForce RTX 4080. Since it's a white one, it'll match our build perfectly. Once again, thank you to GIGABYTE for sending out these parts for us to do this build. It's a pretty big card, like. So we're gonna install the support bracket for the graphics card just so we don't have it sag over time. GIGABYTE actually makes a pretty good bracket that supports all their cards and even their motherboards that are a little wider. So we're gonna remove 2 screws from the motherboard to install the bracket. And in the bag, you get 2 different kinds of screws. Make sure you use the one that's right for your case because not every screw uses the Not every case uses the same type of standoff screws or motherboard screws. So you want to match it with the ones that you took off your motherboard. So this other piece goes in the graphics card on the back here. So once we install the bracket, we're going to install the graphics card into the case. So you want to make sure it lines up, and you're going to hear a nice, actually, let's go under. So go to the bracket. So you want to make sure that the bracket on the graphics card is behind this middle piece here when you install it. Once you hear a click, you know the card's in. So you want to go and take this last screw. And then the card's installed. So as you can see with that bracket, the card's not gonna sag, it's not gonna move anywhere. So you shouldn't have any issues with shipping or if you're moving it around and stuff. So lastly, we're gonna plug in the cable, the power cable for the graphics card. The good thing about this power supply is it comes with the PCIe 5.0 cable. You don't actually need to use the adapter that comes with it, it's a little bulky thing. Any power supply that comes with it, usually a lot nicer. And an important thing is when you're plugging this in, you want to make sure there's a nice audible click when it goes in, because if you don't plug in all the way, there could be a chance that you can start a fire, that the cable starts overheating and melting, and all those fires that you hear about with the 40 series, that's related to that. So make sure it's fully plugged in and it clicks. That click right there. So see if I can pull on it, it won't come out. That's firmly in there. And now we're just gonna route the cables through the back. So we finished assembling the PC. So we're gonna turn it on to make sure it does work. We have a monitor here plugged in. Just before we button everything up, you know? So let's see if it turns on. So as you can see, it does boot to the BIOS screen, which means the computer does work. So that's it for the video. Thank you once again to our sponsors, CORSAIR and GIGABYTE, for sponsoring all the parts for this PC over here. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, subscribe. If you have any technical questions, feel free to leave them in the comments as well. I'll do my best to try to answer those questions for you. And that's it for the video. We'll see you guys next time.